Sound check, sound check, sound check. 1, 2, 3. Sound check, sound check.
Anybody?
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to call this meeting of our Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee to order. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Please note that quorum is present. We will now go through our roll call. As I call your name, if I can just get you to turn on your microphone and acknowledge that you are present. Councillor Cameron Critch. Here. Janice Brown sends her regrets. Karen Burke.
Present.
Graham Carroll.
Present.
Charles Dimitri sends his regrets today. Lynn Lundstedt.
Present.
Robin McKee.
Present.
Timothy Ritchie.
Present.
Will Rosart.
Present.
Just before we move into the approval of our agenda, I just wanted to acknowledge that recently we learned information of the loss of a very important figure in our heritage community, Brian Henley. So we wanted, on behalf of the Municipal Heritage Committee, to extend our condolences to his family and to his friends. And I think Will here would like to say a few. Would you like to say a few words? No? Okay. All right. But Brian was a force in the heritage community. Anyone that's been able to collect his books, the extreme amount of research and time that Brian had dedicated to heritage in this community.
Let me know if I can help.
So again, we want to wish our condolences to his family. Mr. Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair, there's no changes to the agenda. However, I'd like to note that the name of item 9.2B, which is the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee Minutes for August 15, 2023. The title for this item has been revised to reflect that quorum was present, but the meeting did not happen due to technical difficulties.
May I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
I see Graham and Karen.
And as we move to vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Under declarations of interest, do we have any declarations today? I will declare interest for item 8.1 as the firm that I work for is involved in the development plan. Moving on to approval of minutes of the previous meeting, we have item 4.1 is our meeting of the July 21st, 2023. May I have a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
I see Tim and Lynn.
And if there's no discussion on those meeting notes, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Communication items. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the communication items on the floor? Item 5.1 and 5.2.
I see Graham and Tim.
Is there any question or discussion on those items? If not, we will move to vote on approving. Oh, go ahead, Robin. Sorry. Do you have a question?
Yeah, yes, I do. On 5.1, the communications, is that the idea that they want to designate it or they do not want to designate it? Or demo the wing? Demolish the wing? What is the intent of this letter?
Through the chair to Robin, so item 5.2 on the communication items is from consultants who are preparing a cultural heritage evaluation report for the Juravinsky Hospital property.
Right.
So they're doing their background study and review. They've also reached out to staff and we've provided them with all of our research and information. So they are at the stage where they are reviewing the property. So we do not have any development applications in terms of proposal. They're at the initial stages in terms of confirming the heritage value of the site. The property is on our register currently and is also on the list for review for designation.
But nothing is said in the letter about the demolition of it.
Through the chair, I'm just taking a look at the letter again. No, it's an information gathering letter, so there's no indication specifically in terms of the plans for the site.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? If not, as we move to vote on approving the communication items, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. I will now hand the chair over to Graham for item 8.1.
Okay, so this is the staff presentation for the recommendation for designation of 215 King Street West in Dundas under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, PED 23148, Ward 13. Lisa's going to give us a presentation. Are there any questions for Lisa before we start? So we have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation.
Well, sorry, we'll first do the presentations.
Oh, okay. I thought we were in, sorry. Got it backwards.
Okay, just give me a second while I bring up the presentation, please. Okay, so hi all, Lisa Christie, Cultural Heritage Planner. I'm presenting staff report PED 23148, which recommends that the property at 215 King Street West in Dundas be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So this property is located near the northwest corner of King Street West and Market Street North in Dundas. The property is a representative example of a Georgian-style dwelling. It's a 1.5-story brick masonry cottage, and it was built in circa 1851 to 1853. Its features include a 3-bay front facade, box-like massing, and side gable roof with rectangular window openings. So a bit of background on the property. It was listed on the Municipal Heritage Register in May 2021. A formal consultation was submitted in September of 2022. Following a redesign of the development, a subsequent draft plan of subdivision zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of condominium application was received in February 2023. And then we also received a cultural heritage impact assessment. With that application, it was reviewed by Policy and Design in March of 2023, and staff provided final comments on the application and indicated the city's intention to designate the property in April 2023. So staff reviewed the submitted HIA and conducted a site visit from public right-of-way in July of 2023. The property was tested against criteria for determining cultural heritage value or interest as prescribed in Ontario Regulation 906, and we've determined that the property meets 6 of the 9 criteria. So this property meets 2 criteria for design and physical value. The property is representative and unique example of Georgian-style residence with its side gable roof, 1.5-story box-like massing, asymmetrical 3-bay facade. It also displays a high degree of craftsmanship through its front brick facade laid in Flemish bond with English corner detail and the decorative cross brickwork below the front eave, which is depicted in the photo here. So the property meets 2 criteria for historical and associative value. It's associated with the settlement of Dundas and the tradespeople, as it was used as a boarding house for tradespeople in its early years. And the property contributes to the understanding of working class immigrants in Dundas, as it represents conditions in which working families lived in downtown Dundas. Finally, this property meets 2 criteria for contextual value. The property helps maintain the historic residential character of downtown Dundas, and the property is historically visually linked with its surroundings due to its location fronting onto King Street West and close proximity to the public right-of-way. Oh, I skipped too far, sorry. So in summary, the property located at 215 King Street West is comprised of a 1.5-story brick cottage built circa 1851 to 1853. It's representative and unique. It's a representative and unique example of Georgian-style cottage residence, displays a high degree of craftsmanship, and the property is directly associated with the settlement of the town of Dundas and its tradespeople, and it contributes to the understanding of working-class immigrants in Dundas and the greater Hamilton area. And the property helps maintain the historical and residential character of downtown Dundas, and it's historically and visually linked to its surroundings. Okay, so key physical attributes to be recommended for protection by designation bylaw include the front and side elevations of the 1.5-story brick building, side gable roof, 1.5-story box-like massing, asymmetrical 3-bay front facade, front brick facade laid in Flemish bond with English corner detailed, decorative cross brickwork below the front eave, flat-headed window openings on the front facade with brick voussoirs and stone sills, and wood window and door surrounds. Additionally, important to the conservation of 215 King Street West Dundas is its location fronting onto King Street West and its close proximity to the public right-of-way. So thanks, and any questions?
Okay, so Robin, any question?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, is this was one of the priority lists for Dundas for the next 2 years, or was this added?
Through the chair to Robin, yes, this was on the high priority list for designation, as was reprioritized earlier this year in response to Bill 23. It's also prompted by the active development applications that Lisa presented about.
Yeah, the follow-up there is that, are there condos going around this designated property then?
Through the chair, so there is an active set of applications for redevelopment of the site. This building is proposed to be conserved and retained as a part of that redevelopment application. And the scope of that isn't relevant necessarily to the recommendation to designate today, but it was reviewed by the Policy and Design Working Group through the HIA that was submitted in support of those planning applications. So there is further information on the proposal in the appendix, which includes the HIA in Lisa's presentation and staff report.
Okay, thank you very much.
Does anyone else have any further questions? Okay, so now may I have a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation?
I see Karen and Lynn.
Anyone opposed? Well, the motion is carried. So we will now move on to the report. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the recommendations on the floor?
I see Tim and Karen.
So I read them up?
You don't have to.
Okay. Are there any questions regarding the motion to designate? Okay, if not, we will vote on the recommendations before us. Is there anyone opposed to the designation of 215? Seeing none, the motion carries. Hand it back.
Thank you, Graham. We now move on to our consent items. So we have before us item 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, and 9.4. May I have a mover and a seconder to put those consent items on the floor?
I see Graham and Tim.
Are there any questions in regards to any of those consent items? If not, go ahead. Go ahead, Robin.
Through the chair, 9.1A, this is an extension of the date, correct? And this was done by the old council. If we turn this down, does this not have to go to the new council for that extension, not us?
Through the chair to Robin, so what's on the agenda is a delegated approval letter, which, as you mentioned, is to extend the expiry date of the previously approved heritage permit application. So there is no opportunity to change. It already has been approved through delegated authority as a minor change to the previously approved permit. And as the letter indicates, part of this is to allow for the continued discussion related to the Ontario Land Tribunal case for the planning application side of this. So because that was an active process in terms of that appeal, there was an inability for them to work through their conditions of the heritage permit. So this allows for that continued conversation related to the Planning Act application.
So these items, Robin, are simply just being received. We're not approving. Okay. Did you have any further questions, Robin?
I did have one for E.
For E? Okay, go ahead.
Is the roof a designated feature for this property? Because why are we having this permit?
Through the chair to Robin, so the roof is contemporary. However, the repair work that's being undertaken does involve the side brick parapet walls, which are included in the designation. So if it was just the roof system itself, that would be a different scenario, but because there's also masonry repair work involved, that's what triggered the heritage permit requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? If not, may I, as we move to vote on receiving these consent items, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Under discussion items, we have item 10.1, which is a notice of intention to demolish the building located at 279 Hess Street South in Hamilton, being a non-designated property listed on the Municipal Heritage Register, PED 23180 in Ward 2. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the recommendations on the floor?
I see Graham and Councillor Cretch.
So the recommendation before us is that the non-designated property located at 279 Hess Street South, Hamilton, be removed from the municipal register. Are there any questions today? Councillor, go ahead.
Not sure if these are questions or more just like information I've learned, so I'll just say it out loud in public. Yeah, I looked at this property, which is kind of guarded from street view by a largish tree, right? So it's difficult to see the front of the property because there's a tree there, and I've been inquiring about what we can do with respect to this tree. And if I haven't lost the plot, and Ken will correct me if I have, hopefully, is that there are other trees also on this property at the back. There are some maple trees. And we're not sure right now where those trees lie in terms of being private trees or being public trees. We're pretty sure the one in the front is a private tree, and we don't have a private tree bylaw in Hamilton. That being said, I'm going to try to do whatever I can to try to see through the building permit process, any kind of other processes that occur with respect to demolition, that we at least have an agreement between the person doing the demolishing work to try and preserve that tree if possible, right? So that's my goal here, is to try and preserve that tree. It is an invasive species, that tree, but it is an older tree, and we're not just kind of going around cutting down even trees that are invasive species. And if this does, for some reason, have to be cut down, obviously looking to replace it with something that's not invasive. But the goal here for me is to try and save this tree. It's a significantly large tree in this space, but we don't have a private tree bylaw yet, and I'm conscious of that. So just wanted to say that in public, that it's on my radar. I'm talking to staff about it, trying to see what we can do.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions?
Not about 279.
Okay.
214.
Okay, so that if there's none, then as we vote, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. Item 10.2 is the Beasley Register listing objection for 214 Mary Street in Hamilton, PED 22135B in Ward 2. May I have a mover and a seconder to put the recommendations on the floor?
I see Graham and Tim.
So the recommendations before us is that council receive the notice of objection, attaches Appendix A to report PED 22135B from the owner of 214 Mary Street in Hamilton, objecting to the notice of council's decision to list on the non-designated property on the Municipal Heritage Register under Section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that council retain 214 Mary Street on the Municipal Register as a non-designated property that council believes to be of cultural heritage value or interest pursuant to Section 27(8) of the Ontario Heritage Act. Are there any questions from our committee members? Graham, go ahead.
Is there any kind of active plans for that property, or are they just?
Go ahead.
Not a question, just an observation. There's no problem here because they will fall off the registration on January 1st, 2025. So we're spinning wheels here.
Thanks, Robin. And Karen, go ahead.
Thank you. I would just like to point out that I think there's a lot of misconceptions as well in the owner's letter in terms of adding roadblocks and such, that I don't think that really argues towards what he wants. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Any further comments or questions? Tim?
Yes, through the chair. Yeah, this is my neighborhood here. A little question of clarification with the way it's somewhat changed about things off registry and put back on. If we take this off the registry today, which we're not going to, I see that look of rage from the rest of the members, but if we take it off the registry today, does that mean then it would be 5 years from today before it can go back on? And if it goes to 2025, does that mean then there's a 5-year window they can demolish in until 2030? I'm just a little fuzzy on the giant iceberg that is Bill 23 that's annihilating everything.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, through the chair. So the most recent amendments to the Ontario Heritage Act, via Bill 23, in terms of that provision around the automatic expiry and then the restrictions on relisting, haven't yet been tested. Certainly, a lot of other municipalities have asked similar questions in terms of whether those limitations on relisting apply to ones that are voluntarily removed versus expiring after the 2 years. There is no clear language or direction from the province about how to interpret that, so we have yet to see how those particular provisions would actually be interpreted moving forward.
I'd like to say that clears it up, but
It only makes it fuzzier. So. Robin, did you have a follow-up question?
Yes, through the chair, the idea that if we take it off the registry now, this is when the clock starts ticking for 5 years. That's my interpretation of the registry being eliminated in 25. So it's to our advantage to take it off the registry now, I believe. Am I wrong?
Through the chair, so part of the staff recommendation to keep the property on the register until such time as it does expire on January 1st, 2025, is to not only be consistent with similar recommendations where we received objections that don't necessarily provide a rationale for them properties not being of cultural heritage value or interest. So in this case, staff do not feel that that's been sufficiently argued. So the property does still have heritage value or interest. As well, by keeping the property on the register, we at least have that interim protection of 60 days until it does expire. So there is also a risk in removing the property now and not having that interim protection until January 1st, 2025.
Did that clarify what you needed, Robin, or do you have any further comment or question? Robin, you're muted.
What's the issue with the owner for being taken off the register? Is there any plans that he is going to demolish it? Because it's residential and he's got neighbors on either side.
Through the chair to Robin, so following up on Emily's previous response, so we do not have any applications in terms of a building permit to demolish or redevelop at this time. If there were, as you're saying, for residential property, they'd be subject to demolition control anyways and would have to have an application for new development. I'll also just note, and I believe as is noted in the staff report, staff did advise that the property would automatically be removed on January 1st, 2025, regardless of the outcome of this, so they have been advised. But at this point, the reason for the objection and request to be removed is solely due to their objection to being on the register at all.
A follow-up, please? Just okay. The idea here is that educating the owner and complying with the owner's request would give good PR in our situation. We could educate him and then put it back on the registry when necessary. If there's no threat of demolition, there's no need for the protection in 60 days.
Through the chair, the clerk just advised that the property owner, although they did not submit a request to delegate in time for this meeting, that they were advised that they could request to delegate when this recommendation goes to Planning Committee. They have been advised of the staff recommendation. So before you is the staff recommendation and the follow-up advice and responses that we've provided, and it would be at the discretion of this committee in terms of whether or not you'd like to move forward with the recommendation as provided by staff or move a motion to amend it.
Robin, did you want further discussion, or is there any other questions, discussion from members in regards to this?
Well, you just said amend the motion. What do you have in mind?
Well, Robin, it wouldn't be staff amending the motion. It would be if any one of the members of our committee wanted to amend the motion, so.
No, I understand that, but I never had an amendment involved here. What we were presented was the yay or nay. And now staff just said we could recommend an amendment. What would that be?
Through the chair, sorry, the clerk just advised, I use the word amend, but I believe you need to defeat the current recommendation, and then you'd need to move a new recommendation, if so chosen.
Robin, if you'd like to just think about that for a minute, Karen would like to speak. Go ahead, Karen.
Just that it appears from the letter, from the person's address, that they're not actually resident there, and it looks like they're actually a numbered company, so I'm not sure if that makes any difference when we make decisions about, I don't know. I mean, is it a development company? Do we know that? Is that relevant? It's a question.
Through the chair, so in terms of the staff recommendation of how to proceed with the notice of objection to being listed on the register, we've reviewed it as we have previously with these types of objections under the framework of whether or not the property does have cultural heritage value or interest or not sufficient to be listed on the register. So with no new information having been presented to refute the cultural heritage value or interest, the staff recommendation is to have it remain on the register. So we wouldn't necessarily be considering who the owner is, nor should that necessarily affect that. Although, you know, there is an important level, and as Emily, who wrote the report, and follow-up questions that we indicated, there is no applications in. That obviously would also be a consideration, though, if there's an active potential for an application for demolition or redevelopment, that would further support keeping it listed on the register so that if we needed to take action, if a prescribed event was triggered, then we would be able to do so.
Councillor Crouch?
Yeah, I want to just say that I think this is, the letter makes it relatively clear that the objection is based on the premise that city staff or whomever falsely classified this, right? And so I'm going to trust our heritage staff to know that they've classified this correctly, and based on that, I don't see any other reason why we'd remove it from the registry. So I'm just saying that out loud. I think the simple situation is that situation, and whether or not Bill 23 has any play here, I think isn't really relevant at the moment. Like, Bill 23 is going to do what it's going to do, and the city of Hamilton doesn't have necessarily powers to change that directly. So I think our responsibility here is specifically about whether or not we uphold staff's understanding that this is an item that should be on the registry or not, and that's why I'll be voting in favor of leaving it as it is. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. So I've got Graham and then Lynn.
I'm just going to make a simple comment here. We have to support the work of the volunteers of the Beasley Inventory Group who did the work, who recommended to us that this be added to the registry, the work of staff who supported it, the work of the Hamilton Municipal Heritage Committee that recommended this go on to the registry, policy, or the planning department, then council. We've all seen the heritage value of this house, and as a group, we have to support that work. And as far as I'm concerned, it stays on the registry is my position. I don't know what everyone else feels, but I don't see any reason to amend or defeat the recommendation.
Thank you, Graham. Lynn and then Karen.
Through the chair, this is just, I guess, a question. There has been discussion about classifying neighborhoods as conservation districts. If this was to happen to the area surrounding this particular house, and the house was removed from the register, what impact would that have on a potential conservation district designation?
Through the chair to Lynn, it's a good question. So there is no requirement to previously list properties on the register in terms of a justification for a heritage district study. So if a potential heritage district was proposed for this neighborhood or portions of the neighborhood, a updated review would be done in terms of whether or not it meets the criteria under the Ontario Heritage Act. So a very similar review. The fact that we've already done all this work in the neighborhood puts us in an advantage to potentially doing that work in the future. But the status itself in terms of listing would be irrelevant to that. It's obviously a good starting point to understand we've already done that work, but we would be doing an updated evaluation of each property to assist with that.
Karen?
Thank you. Just to follow on to what Graham said, I think beyond respecting what all the other groups have done, I think our role as the committee is to give our best opinion as to whether this meets the criteria for heritage and whether it should be protected for that reason. So, yeah, that is what we're charged with. And so if we agree with that, then we should be agreeing to support what city staff has recommended.
Thank you, Karen. Is there any other further question or comment? Robin, did you have anything further? Okay, so we have before us those recommendations that are on the floor. We'll now move to vote. Is there anyone opposed? Okay, so we see Robin as opposed. Is there any other? If not, that item is carried. We now move on to item 13.1 as our buildings and landscapes. If anyone wishes to provide a report, if we could just by show of hands, we'll start a speakers list. So I see Will, Robin, Karen, Tim, Councillor Critch. Okay. Any others? Okay. And before we jump into our list, is there the intent of adding any properties to our list that we should highlight?
Madam Chair?
Okay. Well, you'll be the first one to speak. Go ahead, Will.
Oh, I can't find my property on here. And it's rather important. It's the Kerr building that finally is getting something happening to it. What is it? Beside the Bank of Nova Scotia, 2024 King Street East.
Through the chair, so under item A, listed under Hamilton, so A and then XIX, you'll find 18 to 22 King Street East, and under XX, 24 to 28 King Street East.
Item A, Hamilton.
Okay, so at least there. Okay, but anyway, the good news is this property looks like it's finally going somewhere. They put barricades around it, and Historica has the contract, it seems, to restore it. So that's probably a step in the right direction, because this one's been dragging forever. So it looks like it's finally getting done. So we'll just watch the progress and see what happens. Thank you.
Was that all you had? Oh, okay. All right. And our next list. Robin, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Under Hamilton XI, the lighthouse move has been delayed again, and the reason for that is that they have to find a happy medium between the two bridges that the feds will agree upon. Do you want me to do all my questions?
Oh, yeah, if you go through all your properties while you're.
Yeah, okay. XIII, I just want to ask the status of the designation. It's the Alkmaar Gatehouse. It was on the priority list.
Through the chair, so no change. It does remain on the list for designation, but nothing to report at this time.
Okay. XXIV, Park Street, the windows are still not in the facade on the third floor roof side. Century Manor, another question with staff and Ken Coit is the designation of that property ready to go when the province makes the sale?
Through the chair, Ken Coit, Director Heritage and Urban Design. Yes, Robin, it is, and we have not
Wonderful.
We have not heard anything further from the province.
Great, great. That's good news. Thank you. 55 York Boulevard. The Copley Building, the status of the designation for that?
Through the chair, sorry, I haven't pulled that one up in a while. I believe the designation was finalized a number of years ago.
But it was never registered.
Through the chair, just sorry, one sec, I'll just confirm the bylaw number. So it was, as you may recall, it was before the amendments to the Heritage Act a few years ago with Bill 108. It was one of a few properties that had a very old notice of intention to designate from, I think, the 1970s. That was dealt with because we did have a legislative timeline after those changes came through. So the bylaw was passed in 2022. It's bylaw 22203 and
Wonderful.
registered on title. So the designation is complete for that property.
Wonderful, good news. Stony Creek, 77 King Street West. Why is it on the list? I don't recall a issue there.
If I'm, oh, go ahead, Melissa, if you want. No, it was in regards to a development property on an adjacent property, wasn't it?
Oh, the pizza place, right?
Through the chair, I believe the conversation was around the Battle of Stony Creek and some concern back in the day around that event. But I don't have the specifics in front of me of why it was originally added, but that I do recall a conversation around that.
Okay. And with Alkmaar, I would like to know the status of the city's report on the adapted reuse.
Through the chair, it's certainly something we can take back to our colleagues in tourism and culture who manage the property. Happy to take that back to them and see if there's an update.
Thank you very much. That's great.
Thanks, Robin. Our next speaker is Karen.
Thank you. I personally don't have a lot of updates. I mean, I know there's work being done towards designation of some of these properties, and I'm not sure if Alyssa would like to speak to those, or, for example, 64 Hat Street, the Valley City Manufacturing. Yes?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Karen. So through the chair, so that property, as you may recall, came through Heritage Committee, I believe it was last month or the month before, and we were just waiting for a finalization of the mutual agreement with the property owner so we could proceed with the designation because it is going through an active prescribed event under the Planning Act. So that has been finalized, and staff will be issuing the notice of intention to designate later this month.
And the 3 Main Street, the former Masonic Lodge.
Through the chair again to Karen. So that property, the bylaw just passed at council last Friday, and we'll also be issuing the notice of passing of that designation bylaw later this month as well.
That's lovely, thank you. I would recommend also, as my final point, I would recommend that 6 Tally Ho, which is section AVIII, it's no longer on the market. I don't consider that to be at risk anymore, so I think we can remove it from the list of properties of interest. Thank you.
So Karen, would you like to put that forward as a
Yeah.
recommendation?
Is that how you do it? Yeah.
Yep.
Yes,
So-
please. I'd like to recommend that it be removed from the list.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that? So Tim. And as we move to vote on removing 6 Tally Ho, is there any objection? Anyone opposed? Okay, seeing none, that item is carried. Next on our speakers list is Tim.
All right, exciting. Okay, I don't have much. I did send some pictures through the staff, and they said they might be able to share them, but if not, it's, oh, they can. Well, that was quick. So this was very current, because this is my walk down to City Hall today. I went by the Cannon Knitting Mills, our great gem of the Beasley neighborhood that we have here that has been there. I know at the last meeting we were at with the Councillor Kretsch, they had talked about speeding up possibility of expropriation of these kind of properties, though I'm sure that's not next meeting, or the meeting after should be fine, Councillor, for that to happen. We'll be fine.
On Wednesday.
Yeah, on Wednesday, that'd be great. But yeah, it has begun again with graffiti. I tried to not get any shots of anybody's personal things, but it is growing, and those weeds, that's about 3 months of growth there on that side of the thing. I think the last time a movie group was there, it was cut down, but that's the only time any kind of maintenance goes on. So it's ongoing, but staff has passed that on to bylaw, so that'll have them quaking in their boots over there at the mill, having that done. Aside from that, on the same street, we're seeing some pushback against registration along my street, Mary Street. So I don't know about, having to have every property on there as a watch, but maybe somewhat. I thought we had the Rach House as a green property that I was watching, but I didn't seem to find it in my list. So I don't know if that's at the end. We talk about adding.
Let's get addressed.
That's a very good question. I don't know any addresses on my street, but it's right across from the street, the property we were talking about, almost. 180 Mary Street? That's a wild guess?
Through the chair, very close, Tim, 179
Oh,
Mary Street. It
I'm off the
is
committee.
a designated heritage property as well.
It is designated, yeah, that's the issue, but there's a massive excavation going on right at the moment at the back, piles of dirt, so it's probably like some kind of foundation work. I know foundation is not part of the designation there, but I imagine that would, if some kind of permit would have had to be pulled before a major excavation around a 1804 property. That was my guess on that date as well. I could get a year off on the address and off on the thing, so quite a bit of work has been going on, which is good, but it's also can be very fragile, I think, those old cottages along there, so I don't know if that's anything that's come before staff for any kind of permits being pulled for that property, or would that qualify as a permit needed for that kind of work?
Through the chair to Tim, so staff can definitely look into that. It doesn't ring a bell off the top of my head. There could be scopes of work, though, that wouldn't impact designated heritage attributes that might not have triggered requirements for heritage permits, but staff will certainly look into ongoing work and confirm.
Okay, that's all I have.
Okay, so Tim, just to clarify, you're not adding the property to
Maybe we should. I make a motion to add it to the green.
green? Okay.
179 Mary, I understand.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Kretsch? And is there anyone opposed as we vote?
For now, I am, yes.
Okay, and is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is added to our list. That item is carried. Councillor Cretch, you're next on the list.
I wasn't going to speak to these items, but since Tim has raised them, just for those curiously taking down notes in the public from this meeting, application number 22125-26900 is actually a closed building permit on this from 2022 to convert the existing single-family dwelling to contain a secondary dwelling unit at 179 Mary Street. So I'm providing that in case any of the things that are going on there may be related to some internal work about providing a secondary dwelling unit, so I would share that with the public. And maybe staff can investigate and we could find out what's happening at our next meeting. But to the Cannon Knitting Mills, yeah, that has been written about widely. And at some time, I also made some comments about, the fact that it's been going on for a long time and we've had various different agreements about when the lofts might start, when the lofts haven't started, film work, these kinds of things. The Beasley lofts, I mean, as they're being so called by the current owner. And this property's been kind of changing hands for, I guess, almost 15 years now. This has been going back and forth. And it is something that's a huge concern because it continues to be a site of potential. And there's been some rumored enzymatic work being done, so using enzymes to assist in remediating this former industrial site to a site that can be built on. And I wonder if perhaps there's worthwhile inquiring as to the status of all of that. Like, I just keep going to Beasley Neighborhood Association meetings when I'm able to do so, and I'm hearing anecdotally a lot of things, but maybe there's a chance to get a progress report for our next meeting. But so where are we at here in terms of the remediation timeframe? Because that seems to be the limiting factor as to getting this developed, is about the remediation. And there seems to be some novel approach here with using enzymes, which may or may not be working. So I just wonder if we have any answers about that or can speak to our next meeting. The reason I added my name to the list was to speak to an item under the red zone there, Roman numeral XVIII, or 18, which is the 98 James Street South, which is the former James Street Baptist Church, which is at the corner of James and Jackson, about a block and a half from City Hall. It's that church which has been demolished mostly. And I brought this up, meetings ago and have been continuing to talk with the new owner of that property. Now I think we're on our 4th or 5th owner now in the last 10 years. And trying to get some sense as to what's going to happen with the back lot, because the back lot continues to be an issue summer, spring, fall, you name it. It's not really kept very well, and the sidewalk isn't getting maintained well in winter because of the way that this is set up. So the idea would be hopefully to take the fencing down, clean it up, and make it a green space. That continues to be my point. When I spoke to the developer owner about it, they were apprehensive, I'll say, about just kind of doing that, because there's a bunch of considerations to make in terms of who will have liability for such a green space. Will the city take it on as part of a temporary park? Like, what will amenities will be in this green space? Because not huge, but like, it's a place where you could put a couple of benches and you could have some, have a chance to sit out there or whatever. And it would certainly be better than the current archaeological function, I'll say, a mound that's there with various greenery pushing through. So I'm working to try and get that at least cleaned up entirely, so that it's not in the same fashion it is now, or made to some public use. I don't know exactly what. There'll be a meeting next week, I think it is, or later this week, I can't recall the date. I will be meeting with the developer to talk about it. They're open to having a discussion. So I just want to pass that on. They're now at the point where they're open to having a discussion about it, and hopefully we'll be able to get somewhere with them, because this is really a matter of them buying into it. It would be extremely weird, probably, and problematic, I would suggest legally, if the city was trying to expropriate a parcel of the property to turn it into a green space for 1 year. So this is going to be something where we're going to require some cooperation from the person who owns it, and I'm, at this point, hopeful we'll get somewhere. I'll let you know.
Thank you, Councillor. And I have Graham on the list.
Okay, I gotta go back to my list here. So it is 175 Lawrence Road, Hamilton Press Brick Company. I've saw that there's some demolition going on the property. I'm wondering just how far they're extending it. Does anyone knows?
Through the chair, we've had discussions with the owner. They have done a heritage assessment. The The site is not protected, it's not designated. They've been working with ERA, and they've defined 4 or 5 important buildings on the site that they have voluntarily agreed to keep for future use, as they're just using the site for storage at the moment. And then there's ongoing discussions about the future use of that site. It's got some very complicated zoning issues and access issues, given that it's got access across the tracks. So the owner does recognize the heritage importance of it, but there's also safety concerns and insurance concerns. And so they've agreed to mothball several of the buildings that ERA has defined as important to tell the story of that site.
Can you let us know which ones they plan on retaining at the next meeting? And if they're planning on keeping that big stack there or not?
I will ask the applicant if we can share that report.
Okay, thank you. Because it knows that there's some buildings coming down already. Just want to see how far they're going.
Yeah.
Thank you, Graham. Do we have any further updates? And any further additions to our list or deletions from the list? Oh, Graham?
With no concern lately at the gardens at Gage Park, I highly recommend that that be taken off the list now. The Dunnington Grub Gardens.
Do you want to? Just quickly looking through the list to see if, so we can direct clerks as to which item it is.
Through the chair, I think it's XV. A, B, and then under Hamilton, XV.
So we have Graham putting forward the motion to remove that property. Do we have a seconder? Karen? And as we move to vote to remove, is there anyone opposed?
As long as it doesn't get back to David Beeland, I'll support it coming off.
We appreciate all of those volunteers that keep an eye out for the park. Anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is removed. And if there's no further updates, may I have a mover and a seconder? Oh, go ahead, Alyssa.
Oh, sorry, through the chair, just while you were going through the rest of the list, I did confirm that Culture Heritage Planning staff were consulted on 179 Mary Street and confirmed that the scope of work didn't require a heritage permit. So that's why the building permit was able to be issued.
Very good news. That's good. May I have a mover and a seconder to receive all of our updates?
And Robin's.
Oh, go ahead, Rob. Oh, Robin, are you receiving or you have a further update?
Just another, back to the Battlefield Park. If there is no issue, we can take that off the wish list. I'd recommend that it be taken off. There's no risk there now that I know of. And one other thing that
Robin, just before you move on, which property was that you want removed?
Battlefield Park.
Oh, Battlefield Park. Oh.
There's no need for any kind of watch list.
Through the chair, yeah, just to confirm that's BXXV for clerks.
Okay. And then Robin, what was, sorry, I didn't put you there. What was the second part you were going to?
I had an afterthought on St. Mark's. What is the status there?
I'll happily answer that question. Could you be more specific? Status of what?
The actual construction around it and in it.
Oh, that I can't help you with. The answer is progressing relatively on pace. I believe that it'll be done, I guess it'll be done this year, and there's a discussion going on right now about going to the facility naming subcommittee in November, I believe it's November 10th, to discuss what the new facility will be called. But so far it's proceeding, I think, as it should proceed. I don't think there's been any red flags that I've seen, but staff may know more than me.
Through the chair, I'll just note maybe a bit of a plug for our colleagues in Heritage Resource Management. They maintain the Link newsletter to discuss various Hamilton Civic Museums and other related work, and they do provide updates in terms of that project through that newsletter regularly.
So Robin, you're putting forward the motion to remove 77 King Street West, Battlefield House from the list. Do we have a seconder?
Correct.
Graham? And is there anyone opposed as we go to vote? Seeing none, that item is carried. Okay. All right, and is there any other properties we need to discuss? Did we have a mover and a seconder for the list? Receiving? Oh, we need a mover and a seconder.
I see Will and Graham.
Okay. And is there anyone opposed to receiving? Or Councillor, did you have further question?
Yeah, I just thought maybe if it was helpful, if you could, Alyssa, because you mentioned it, if you don't mind, could you tell people how they can get a hold of this newsletter? Because like, it's not necessarily super obvious.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Councillor. So through the chair, they're, at least how I joined it, through their social media. So the Hamilton Civic Museum's social media account, Instagram, what have you, does often advertise it. But I'd be happy to also share if there's a direct email that folks can reach out to join the newsletter as well.
And as we move to vote to receive all of these updates, is there anyone opposed? Seeing none, that item is carried. As we move towards our adjournment, are there any updates from staff at all for any?
Through the chair, just that we continue to actively pursue filling Chloe's vacancy. We did go back out for reposting, so hopeful on the second round. It's a very competitive field right now and limited number of folks who are in the culture heritage planning realm, and every municipality is trying to hire as well as private companies. So yes, we continue to go through that process.
Thank you, Alyssa. Any other updates? Tim, I see you down there.
Yeah, just through the chair, I don't know how wide it was, but I understand the chair of our permit committee is resigning after the next meeting, Chuck Dimitri. And I was wondering if there's going to be any move to fill a vacant seat. I mean, everybody on the committee is already on both committees, I imagine, but it will mean by September there will be needed for that. I don't know if selection committee has new members yet, or if we're going to need to replace a seat on there at some rate. I wouldn't want to be the vice chair on that. Oh no. Never mind.
Go ahead now.
Through the chair, so the selection committee is meeting to review candidates. I believe they're setting up interviews into October. So that's where it stands right now.
But in the interim for the existing subcommittee, so the chair will be leaving as of the end of the month. So
Yeah, so the chair, there would be a new chair appointed from existing membership, and quorum would be adjusted to reflect how many members there are.
So Tim, you're going to want to make sure you attend that next meeting.
Is that decided at this committee? I thought this is where we decide for chair and vice chair is at this main committee, and this will be the last meeting before the next heritage committee, the next permit review goes on in September.
Through the chair, no. So I understand in terms of who can act as chair on the Heritage Permit Review Subcommittee, it would be a cross-appointed member of this main Heritage Committee. So we would look if, when and if a formal resignation is issued, which has not happened yet, then we would obviously address quorum and then ensure that we appoint a new chair of the members who are cross-appointed from this committee for permit review.
So the clarification of it, does that mean if Chuck's official resignation is September 1st, then the next main committee here would make a decision on a new chair? Or, because wouldn't the permit meeting happen before the next main meeting? I mean, I understand I will have to chair that September meeting at minimum, or every meeting, but I mean, I'm not just about the chair, but about meeting quorum and members to fill out that one as well is also needed.
So if I understand the question, so the subcommittee itself is going to appoint the chair. So that would happen at the meeting after, or the meeting the resignation is received. So presumably September. And then you're referring to when, if this committee can appoint more members?
Oh, I didn't realize that the subcommittee actually appointed its chair. The last time it happened, it was done at this committee. When Chuck and myself were put on, it was done here. So I just didn't understand the procedure. I didn't realize subcommittees
I think
on their own.
through the chair, the report from the subcommittee recommending the chair would come through to this committee for approval, then to planning, then to council. So maybe that's maybe what you're referring to.
And through the chair, I think the difference would also be at the start of the term when you're appointing the chair and vice chair to the newly appointed permit review from this committee versus midterm and dealing with this resignation in terms of who the acting chair will be for the rest of the term.
Councillor?
Not to continue to sort of pour over the minutia, so to speak, but just on the point of, I heard an audible gasp when we talked about October as a time for ongoing committee interviews. I just want to really clarify, every time I have an opportunity to do so as a committee member, I'm on the selection committee, I just want to clarify what that process looks like and where we are at in the process. So usually, in terms of council, we do the selection committee process starting in November. Choice was made, I believe it was by the Office of the Mayor, to put that off until the spring, wanting to do different phases of committee selection. So there are 3 phases. Phases for appointing councillors to things, phases for appointing some people to some subcommittees, then there's other subcommittees, advisories, tribunals, boards, and then there's also advisory committees, which are a separate group. So we split them up this time, so not to have one big lump of work in November and do it over the period. So these committees are lumped into the spring section, but we've gone through a totally different process this time around in terms of how we're evaluating them. We're making sure that as many members as possible are present at meetings. We're going through, I think, more of a deliberation than perhaps we have in the past, and trying to offer as many interviews as possible. And so as a result of doing that, it's taking longer to schedule the interviews. I think we have dozens of hours of interviews scheduled, so it's going to take time for us to go through those interviews and then select somebody based on the interviews. So it is taking longer than we'd hoped, because usually it triggers sort of closer to the beginning of the term. And just wanted to let people know what that is. We're also, there's a lot of work being done for other selection. Outside of this, advisory committees are also going through a bit of a pause right now. So there's all these different things that are happening at the same time. So I wanted to let you know where we're at. The answer is likely October. That's my guess.
Thank you, Councillor, for clarifying that. Tim, did you have any further questions about permit review? Or you?
Probably.
Okay. So Alyssa is correct. So at the very beginning of the term, this committee did appoint who we wanted as representatives on that committee and who would be chair and vice chair. So now that we're having to adjust to the midterm change, it will come down to permit review to decide who. But it's still a member of the Heritage Committee, because there are non-members as well on that.
Okay.
So Tim, Graham, Karen. So it'll be, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I just had one question, just to clarify. So the chairperson has to be someone on this committee, is that correct? Okay.
Yes,
Because there's a lot of great people on that committee. so.
absolutely, yeah. I believe the way the bylaw is set up for all of the working groups and subcommittees is that a representative of Municipal Heritage Committee has to be the chairperson of those groups. Any further questions? Any other updates before we look to adjournment? Seeing none. So our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, September 26th. No other changes. So if not, may I have a mover and a seconder to adjourn today's meeting?
I see Tim and Graham.
Is there anyone opposed? Seeing none. That item is carried. Thanks, everyone. Another great meeting, and we will see you September 26th.